Good evening. How are we doing, Ames? Good to hear. My name's Luke Spence. I'm a city councilman in Nevada, right next door. Cheer for Nevada? I want to make a special thank you to the folks at Cafe Diem tonight. They do this free of charge, I believe. So please thank them with your business, okay, and your tips. All appreciated. I host a forum in Nevada called Coffee with a Candidate. We're going to call it Coffee with the Candidate tonight too, even though it's in Ames. It's an important forum to bring candidates, so we all get to hear what all the candidates have to say at all levels of government. But another part of that is getting out the vote and making sure everybody has access to vote. So if you are interested in a voter registration form, I do have them with me tonight. It's a very loyal crowd here. I bet you probably all are ready to vote. But if you are have moved recently, if you are an independent or maybe a Republican, I know there are some in here. I'm not going to out you, but I do know you're here. So if you want a form, become a Democrat so that you can caucus for Congresswoman Gabbard. By all means, come see me later on. There you go. We're very fortunate in Iowa to have all these candidates come. I've lived in other states before, but we don't get this type of exposure anywhere else. And I've talked with my son, Jack, who's 11, about, he's very involved. He wants to know what all the candidates say. And I ask him, who do you like? Who's your candidate? And he always looks at me and says, well, I don't know, Dad, I haven't met them all yet. Which is the most spoiled Iowan thing to say. In order to pick a candidate for president, you have to meet them all. But we're very fortunate to have Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard here tonight. Some quick notes about Congresswoman Gabbard. She was first elected to public office in 2002 to the Hawaii State Legislature. She's also served on Honolulu City Council and was first elected to Congress in 2013, also serving as the vice chair of the DNC from 2013 to 2016. She's one of the few candidates in the field who's a veteran, having served 2 tours of duty in the Middle East, reaching the rank of major. She's continued that service both through her continued service in the National Guard in Hawaii and as well as being on the Armed Services and Foreign Affairs Committees in Congress. So we should all thank her for her service, most definitely. She supports making community college tuition free for all Americans, as well as 4-year degrees for low and middle class families. That's very important here in Ames, Iowa, I do believe. Agreement, yes.
Yes, of course it is.
I'd say go Cyclones. I'm a Hawkeye fan. I lost the crowd, I'm sorry. I'm not a Republican, no. I'm not one of the closeted ones here today. She supports Medicare for all. She supports raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. She not only supports equal pay for equal work for women, but for the woman's right to choose as well. That's quite a resume indeed for president, I do believe. So I'm pleased to introduce Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii.
Applause for your own Councilman Luke Spence. Luke Spence, thank you for your service and stepping up to serve. I want to say thanks to Madeline Anderson here, who is the co-chair of the Story County Democrats. She's standing over here by the door. There you go, she's waving, you can't see her. And is Morgan here? I think Morgan's the manager.
But we're here.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank all of you. Thanks for letting us come in and take over for a little while. And thank all of you for coming. It's great to see you and great to be back here in Ames. Thank you so much. It's been a busy couple of days. We went to the Iowa State Fair yesterday. How many of you had a chance to go? Yeah, okay, a few of you. On purpose? Not on purpose? We've just always have such a great time when we come here to Iowa because all of you are so nice. You're so welcoming, you're so kind and generous, and we appreciate the opportunity to be able to come and have these kinds of important conversations that we're having here today. I feel like for a long time now, for several months now, as we've been traveling around this country and in pursuing this campaign, we've been dealing with a lot of challenges, and there are many challenges that we face, but this week especially, I think, has been a tough one for us as a country, as we've seen the shootings and the terrible loss of life in places like Dayton and El Paso, and many others that don't make the headlines. And when these things happen, our heart breaks as a country because of how divided we are. The fact that these things are happening at all. And I think that's an important thing for us to reflect on, about why we are in this situation. Why are we in this position, and how do we move forward, most importantly? I think that's what I've been hearing from a lot of folks is, where do we go from here? What do we do? What can we actually do as a country? And yes, there are pieces of legislation that I think we need to pass in Congress. A couple of months ago, we passed the universal background check bill. It's sitting in the Senate, waiting for a vote. We've got to continue to put on the pressure to Mitch McConnell to bring that legislation to the Senate floor for a vote. I'm hoping in the wake of these tragedies that he actually does that, and does it soon. But there are also other deeper-seated issues that we've got to acknowledge and recognize and solve. And those deeper-seated issues have to do with how divided our country is, and the consequences of what happens when fear and racism and bigotry is fomented, tearing us apart, putting us in, some of us in one camp and others in another camp, whether it be because of our politics, who we vote for or against, the color of our skin, where we come from, who we love, how we worship, or if we worship. These are all things that are so often used to tear us apart. And unfortunately, our president, this president in the White House right now, is guilty of doing that for his own political gain, fomenting that kind of racism and fear in people for his own selfish interests without really thinking about what the consequences are. So it's during these times when we recognize the challenges that it's important for us as a people to rise to that challenge, to bridge those divides, to heal these wounds. And how do we do that? We remember what it is that binds us all together as a country. What is that glue that this diverse fabric of this country is woven through that holds us all together? It is who we are as Americans, and the rights and the freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution. Those inalienable rights bestowed upon all of us. That right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That when we stand on that common ground, we recognize we are not a perfect country. We have a lot of work to do. We have many challenges to overcome, but when we stand on that common ground, inspired by that love we have for our country and for each other, then we can continue to move closer and closer to that more perfect union. That more perfect union that really does recognize the freedoms we share, that recognizes that every single one of us is created equal, with equal opportunity, as we pursue justice, true justice, and equality and opportunity for everyone. This is what we're talking about, and this to me is the roadmap for us in how we move forward as a country, how we heal these divides and start to bring about the real systemic change that we need to see. I think in this election it's important, and if you've come to this event, you agree with me that we need to defeat Donald Trump in 2020. I think we also recognize that there are a lot of challenges and problems that we've had in this country for a long time that pre-exist the November of 2016 election. And that we as a country can't afford to allow these systemic problems to persist. Problems that have to do with the fact that we have a government that is of, by, and for the rich and powerful, not of, by, and for the people. That we have a government that is influenced by big special interests, big corporations, those who have the money and the ability to buy influence, interests like big insurance and big pharma, who have more of a hand in shaping our current healthcare system than we, the people, do, and we see the result of that. We see the outcome of that. That as tens of millions of people in this country still go without the healthcare they need because they're either not insured or they're underinsured, they have a high deductible and they can't afford to pay it, one healthcare emergency away from total disaster, living in fear of that happening to them or to a loved one, and yet big insurance companies are raking in huge profits. Huge profits. And when we look at their business model for big insurance and big pharma, we see how our healthcare system is not a healthcare system at all. It's a sick care system. Because their business model is not built around healthy people. It's built around sick people. So we get to the root of how broken our system is, and this is one very prominent example. And why it's so important for us to have a government truly of, by, and for the people that's advocating for the people. Now, healthcare is an issue that's top of mind for, I think, most people in this country. This is why it's important. This is why I support passing Medicare for all, because we've got to make sure that every single person in this country who's sick or in need of care is able to get that care, regardless of how much or how little you have in your pocket. Because we spend more money on healthcare than any other country in the world, and we have far worse outcomes. Where is that money going? It's going to these private corporations, these for-profit corporations, and people are suffering as a result. So if we've got the opportunity to make sure every single American gets quality health care and we as a country are paying less, we've got to take that opportunity. This is what happens when we talk about putting people ahead of profits. We look at the environment, climate change. Now this is another issue that gets so politicized, and we see the big money interest behind that politicizing of an issue that's actually important to all of us, and we see how we spend almost $30 billion still every year to subsidize these big fossil fuel corporations, when that money could be staying either in our pockets or investing in renewable energy, getting us off of fossil fuels, so that we're actually providing for our people in a way that is healthy for them and sustainable for our environment. This is what happens when you put people ahead of profits. When you take that big money influence out of Washington and instead say, how do we actually solve the problems that we're facing? Recognizing that this is not a partisan issue. Protecting our environment is an issue that's important for all of us as people. Who in this country can live without clean water? Who in this country can live without clean air? Who in this country can live so long as our environment continues to erode, when we don't have a safe place to live? When these beautiful places that we get to call home are constantly being polluted and eroded? This is what we're talking about. And I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican or independent, I have yet to meet someone who says, you know what, I'm fine with polluted, poisonous water. I'm okay with that.
Oh, there are plenty of them here.
Until it happens to you, until it happens to your family, until your family and your children are the one who are being poisoned by that water. Then it gets very real. But this is real for so many families across the country. There is more that we share in common that provides us with the opportunity to bring about change than we often realize. Criminal justice reform. There's a great opportunity to finally bring about reform and fix this broken justice system that is causing so much harm, tearing families apart, and costing us as taxpayers an incredibly high amount of money. It doesn't have to be that way. And this is an issue where we see conservatives and progressives coming together because they recognize how broken it is, saying we've got to fix it. Congress is dysfunctional in many ways, but this issue is one area where there's an example of how change is possible when we set partisan politics aside and put people first. We passed this historic legislation called the First Step Act. It's a prison reform bill with the goal and the aim of reducing the high recidivism rates in this country and actually helping make sure that those who have served their time are able to go out and contribute, be functioning members of society again. And what we've seen, this bill was passed several months ago, less than a year ago, and just in the last month, I think there's over 5,000 people now who've been released from prison and back into their families and communities as a direct result of this legislation. That's huge. You think about their families, you think about their lives. This is what's possible. We can do more. We have to do more. Sentencing reform, past sentencing reform that's long overdue. Ending private prisons, making it so that private corporations are not profiting once again off of a model that incentivizes them to keep people in those prison cells and in those beds, rather than saying, how do we actually help people and reduce these recidivism rates in this country? We've got to get rid of the cash bail system. I can tell you in my home state of Hawaii and communities across the country, you've got people who are arrested or charged with a crime, but who have not yet gone through the justice system, who've not yet been convicted of a crime, but who are held in custody oftentimes for months because they don't have enough money in their pocket to pay for the bail. That's not how we should be making these decisions, because on the other hand, you have people who are charged with serious crimes. They got a lot of money, they can pay bail, and they go on with their life. It's a system that benefits the rich and punishes the poor. And speaking of those who get off easy, because they've got the money and the power, we have to look no farther than big Wall Street banks and big pharma and those responsible for the opioid crisis. When you actually research and look at the lies that these big pharmaceutical companies like Purdue Pharma have told, and how they have found and exploited every single loophole to proliferate these drugs on our streets, how they've given people these drugs without the kinds of warnings that should come with such a highly addictive drug, and why? Why? They made a hell of a lot of money. Exactly. They made a hell of a lot of money, and they still are. None of them have been convicted of any crimes, to my knowledge, yet thousands, if not tens of thousands of people have died as a result. What to speak of the many more whose lives have been ruined, who've seen their careers, their families, their education, their homes lost as a result. Wall Street banks is the same story. We know that these Wall Street banks are bigger today than they were back when they were too big to fail, and we as taxpayers bailed them out. All those families who lost their homes and their pensions and their retirement funds, they didn't get a bailout. They didn't get a bailout from the government. Who got it? It was the big banks. The big banks who are still spending money to pay for lobbyists in Washington today to fight against the kind of regulation that we deserve, to fight against reinstating the Glass-Steagall Act so that they stop gambling with our futures. They're the ones who are holding that influence. That's why we're in this position today. These are all many different examples, and there are more as we talk about infrastructure and higher education and education serving the needs of our people. But they all come back to these basic core problems that only we the people can solve. When we talk about a government of, by, and for the people, this is why it is so critical. And it's easy to be disheartened because we see how powerful big money is. We see how powerful the establishment is in Washington. But we cannot forget the power that we have in our hands, the power of the people. Because it is only we, the people, who have the ability to overcome the powers that be in Washington, to make sure that they are truly serving our interests. We cannot forget that every time there is an election, it is we, the people, who have the opportunity and the power to hire or fire those who hold those offices. That's in our hands. We've seen throughout history when great change has been made in this country. It has been made against the direction that the powers believe things are going. They forget and lose sight of where the power actually lies in this country. When these big changes have happened in the civil rights movement and the movement that gave us as women the right to vote, these big movements have happened because we, the people, have risen up and demanded that change. And I believe we are at that moment in our country now where we have been failed for far too long by leaders who have left us behind. Leaders who have turned off the volume, not hearing our voices, and who are serving either their own interests or the interests of the rich and powerful rather than serving the interests of the people. And we know what's at stake. There is so much at stake. It is our lives, it is our home, it is our safety and our security. Now there's an issue that's central to all of these that I think it's important to address, and that is the cost of war. It's an issue you don't hear talked about very much these days. But our foreign policy is inseparable from our domestic policy, because as we're talking about the needs of our people, that requires resources, that requires investment. As we sit here today, we as taxpayers are spending $4 billion every month in Afghanistan. $4 billion every month. That's one slice of the over $6 trillion we've spent since 9/11 alone, waging wasteful, counterproductive wars that have taken the lives of so many of our brothers and sisters in uniform, that have caused mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, to stand there at that airport and welcome their loved one coming home in a coffin. Wars that have made our country less safe, resulting in the strengthening of terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Wars that have caused such devastation in the countries where we've waged them, causing refugee crises, causing destroyed communities, destroyed families. So we talk about the cost of war, it's all of these things. While those of us who've worn the uniform have felt directly and seen directly the cost of war in a deeply personal way, this cost has taken a toll on every single one of us. Because those dollars have been taken out of our schools. Those dollars have been taken out of our healthcare system. They've been taken out of our roads, our bridges, our communities, the needs that we have right here at home. This is why we need change. Our leaders have failed us. And it's time that we stand up and change those leaders so we have leaders who are truly for us, who will have our back, who will be our champion. This is what's motivating me to run for president, to offer to serve as your president and commander-in-chief, fulfilling that promise, bringing those soldiers' values of service above self to the White House, so that our White House can truly be a beacon of hope, a beacon of light and of opportunity, a White House that belongs to the people. So I want to close by just saying thank you, because you're here today because you care. There's one thing in this world that once we give it away, we can never get it back, and that's time. And I value the time that you've taken to come here today, the decision and the choice that you've made to be a part of this people-powered movement and to be a part of this change. This is what gives me hope as I get to visit different communities across your state, visit different communities across the country, because there are people gathering in rooms just like this all over the country who are fired up, motivated by love. Motivated by love. Love for our country, love for each other, and a care for the future that we will leave behind for our kids and their kids and their kids after that. So we always must remember what Dr. King told us, that only light can drive out darkness, that hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. So as we are in these times that sometimes seem so dark, so divisive, and so filled with hate, let us continue to be inspired by that love, understanding that only love can defeat this darkness. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for joining us today. Aloha. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. I want to take a few of your questions, but I also just wanted to add another quick thanks. It is because of you, as we speak about the power of the people, it is only because of you that I had a voice on that debate stage. You made that happen. You made that happen. So it is only because of you and your support and your help that we will continue to make sure that we are heard in this country. We are working to make sure that we qualify for that next debate coming up next month. I appreciate all of your support in helping us get there. Thank you. I'm going to take my first question right here.
My name is Thomas, and I'm from Nevada. My number one concern is about climate change. I'm looking for someone who wants to lead us back into the agreement, and also what specific plans would you put in place to reduce climate change? And what would you get science to reduce their effect on climate change? And I also wanted to know about the debt ceiling.
Easy question.
Thank you. Thank you for raising this very important issue that impacts you and your future and all of our futures. This issue of climate change and the problems that are presented before us as a result. I come from a state in Hawaii. Have you been to Hawaii before?
No.
No, it's a small island state in the middle of the ocean in the Pacific. It's the most remote island chain in the world. And for me, when I was your age and growing up, I was really passionate about protecting our environment for many, many reasons. It was my home, it is my home, and understanding even from a young age the threats to our home. And that's what we're dealing with climate change. That's what motivated me to get involved with politics in the first place when I was still very young. But it's also what's driven my action in Congress. So you ask about what is my specific plan. First of all, yes, as president, I would re-enter the Paris agreements, but that alone is not enough. Even those who were signers of that agreement recognized then that this was a positive start for the world to come together to address climate change, but it didn't go nearly far enough. So we've got to come at this from two directions. We've got to make bold and ambitious changes here at home to get us off of fossil fuels and invest in a clean, renewable energy economy. As a member of Congress, I've introduced the most ambitious climate change plan ever. It's called the Off Fossil Fuels Act. And it provides a very specific and actionable plan to get us off of fossil fuels, make those investments in renewable energy, and make those investments in a renewable energy workforce to be able to make that transition possible. We also have to look at how we can reform our agriculture industry that in some ways and in many ways is contributing so much carbon to our environment, exacerbating this threat. And the last thing is providing that leadership in the world, leading with a foreign policy based on cooperation rather than conflict, so that we can work with other countries like China and others to address this problem. Because even if we do all that we must, if we do every single thing we need to do here in the United States right now, and we do need to do that, it still won't be enough if we are standing alone. We've got to work together in this global community to address this crisis. Thank you so much for your question.
Hello, Congresswoman Gabbard. My name is Joe. I'd like to pose a specific question that I wrote down right here. So currently, the NRCS, National Resource Conservation Service, one of the programs such as EQIP, Environmental Quality, in addition to regenerative agriculture. Also, do you intend to encourage NRCS and other USDA agencies to train their employees about regenerative agriculture and host workshops for farmers and ranchers on the topic? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. That was very specific. You're speaking of a kind of farming and agriculture that isn't new, but more and more people are just now starting to learn about it. Something that's been around for a very long time, and that provides an answer to the challenge we face both as it relates to climate change and to our increasing ailing soil health that threatens our ability to grow food to feed our people. I've had a chance to visit some of the regenerative farms here in Iowa, as well as in other states, and seen and learned firsthand about how beneficial it is to our ability to farm in a sustainable way and to be able to do so for a very long time to come. So yes, both through the USDA as well as through Congress, we're working to reform the Farm Bill and the bureaucratic agencies so that people are learning more about what regenerative farming is and how much of a huge positive impact it could make if more of our farms started moving in that direction. I think that's how we can use the federal government, the power of incentives. Are we incentivizing more of the farming that's perpetuating many of the same problems we're seeing growing, or are we incentivizing more of these farming practices that are good for our economy, that are good for our people, and good for our planet? That's the kind of farming and agriculture policy I would seek to bring about.
Yes, the enormous gap and ever-growing between the wealth and income, the inequality in the United States. How would you address that specifically?
Thank you. This is such a big problem that again is rooted in how our tax policy benefits the very few who have the most and disadvantages those who are just really working hard and struggling just to survive. So as you heard Lance talk about in the intro, yes, I support raising the minimum wage, but I think that we've got to recognize that in some places and in many places that's not a living wage. It's not enough to survive, and that doesn't deal with the heart of the income inequality that we're seeing that's getting worse and worse with a middle class that continues to drop. We've got to look at our tax policy and our economic policy and turn it on its head and look at how we're taxing. Right now we are taxing labor more than we're taxing capital. That's a specific thing that's got to change. We're looking at how corporations like Amazon are able to completely circumvent our tax code and exploit loopholes and pay no taxes and get a tax credit at the end of the year, while all of us end up paying our full taxes. There's no loopholes for us to exploit. So as we get to how the rich and powerful create these loopholes that only they benefit from, and we are left behind, that speaks to how we got to turn our system on its head. We're actually thinking about how we can make sure we've got a fair tax policy and fair economic policy that best serves us. Another area I'm looking at specifically to see how we can help with this is universal basic income. I think that provides great potential that could provide immediate help for those, again, who are literally just struggling to pay the bills and keep the lights on. These are some of the things that some of the approaches that we need to take to begin to tackle this problem. I think there's a lot of other components to it, like the lack of affordable housing, the high cost of healthcare, all things that take away from our ability to live the lives that we want to live and have the freedom to do so. Yes.
Hello. My name is Lucy. I grew up in Ames, but I go to Michigan State now for criminal justice. So criminal justice is part of the most important aspects of a candidate. So you touched on a lot of really important issues. I just wanted to know some specific solutions you have for cash bail, for privatized prisons, for the mass incarceration issue that's very clearly racialized. And also I'm very interested in if you have any ideas about just prisoner rights. Because a lot of people think about prisoners as they go to jail, they go to prison, forget about them. But they're still people and we don't treat them like people.
Thank you for your question. I'm glad to hear that you're going into this field. I talked about some of the specifics before and about how they disproportionately impact poor people and people of color. The one that I didn't touch on very much is the failed war on drugs. This is one now that for generations, again, has had a negative and disproportionate impact on people of color in this country. I have introduced in Congress the only bipartisan legislation that would immediately end the federal prohibition on marijuana. The fact that we are still imprisoning people in this country now for minor marijuana violations is ridiculous. The fact that we still have people who are sick and who would like to use medicinal marijuana as medicine are not able to in a lot of states in this country. And the fact that as we're talking about an opioid crisis and an opioid epidemic, rather than ending the federal marijuana prohibition, because we have seen the direct correlation between states that have legalized some form of medical marijuana recreational and a drop in opioid addiction and opioid-related deaths. So again, you see the profit incentive, because instead of just saying, well, obviously we should end the federal marijuana prohibition because we see how it's worked and actually helped people, instead what we see are bills that are put forward in Congress to appropriate funds to pay the pharmaceutical companies who are coming up with more drugs to help those who got addicted to their last drugs. It's crazy. It's crazy, but this is the system that exists in Washington. As it relates to mass incarceration, as we deal with the many different reasons, whether it is the failed war on drugs or, laws like 3 strikes, mandatory minimums, these are things that are some of the causes of why we have so many overcrowded prisons. There are deep-rooted problems that we need to address, but these are some of the laws that I think we need to reform to begin to address the mass incarceration in our country. As it relates to how we are treating people in our prisons, these are opportunities for us. Once someone, if they committed a crime and they've been charged with a crime, they go and serve their time. We should be providing the opportunity to actually help them change, come back to our communities, come back to their families, not as broken people, but as people who are ready to come back and contribute and be a part of those communities and families. This is focusing on reducing those recidivism rates is not only good for the people who we are helping, but it's good for us as a society. It makes us stronger.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to take one from the back here.
So Iowa's minimum wage is currently $7.25, and raising the minimum wage to $15 means that each minimum wage worker will be making $7.75 more, which means that businesses can now charge that $7.75 more. Strictly raising the minimum wage, I'm not sure will do all that much to help with the poverty crisis. Even instituting a universal basic income, businesses can now just charge more. So raising the minimum wage will just cause those currently making $15 to just be put in a minimum wage situation. So
What's your answer?
So how do you plan on keeping those making $15 now out of poverty?
First, let's look at how we are in this situation in the first place. We've seen with inflation and the rising of prices and the cost of doing business, the cost of living has increased in this country over time, right? Do you agree with that? But those who are working have not seen their wages increase in a commensurate way with the raise in the cost of living. That's the problem that we're seeking to address. And it has to be addressed because our workforce is the backbone of our economy. If we don't have people in the workforce, then these businesses can't stay alive and can't survive. We have to place a greater value on our workforce, on the people who are coming and providing these services. And many of them are service-related jobs. And so yes, if that means we end up paying a little bit more, then we are paying a little bit more, but we also have more money coming into our economy. So our economy grows stronger as a result. Now I think there is a concern, I think there's a valid concern, especially about small businesses. People who are employing maybe less than 10 people who really struggle just to keep the doors open. If you look at, okay, well they've got to pay more for these wages, they've got to factor that in every step of the way, right? So I think it's valid for us to have a conversation about how, Walmart is making a ton of profits right now. You can't tell me Walmart can't afford to pay their people what they deserve to be paid. So I think there's something to be said for perhaps a carve out for small businesses, that they can gradually increase those wages. Or perhaps there's a way that we can look at our tax code once again so that we are incentivizing paying people more, perhaps through a tax credit deduction for the employer, rather than what we currently have where the tax code incentivizes an employer to write off the purchase of assets and property rather than investing their dollars in people. There's a number of ways that we can look at how to address some of the challenges that exist, but ultimately the objective is making sure we are reducing the income inequality in this country, that we are paying people a living wage so that we don't have so many people who are literally struggling just to survive every day. This is the United States of America. We can do better, we must do better, and we've got to place the value on our people, not on the biggest corporations who are profiting off the backs of the people. Thank you so much, everybody. We're running out of time. I want to be able to get a chance to just say hello and shake your hand, take a picture if you like. I'm going to talk to the media for just a couple of minutes, and then we'll have a few minutes to meet and greet. Thank you all so much for being here. Please tell your friends, Tulsi2020.com. We need your support to continue to build and grow our campaign. Thank you so much.
All right, so